The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked pavement as 14-year-old Tommy made his way home from school. His basketball jersey clung to his back, drenched in sweat from the 2-hour practice session he'd just finished. Coach Williams had really pushed them hard today, running drill after drill until Tommy's legs felt like jelly. All he could think about was the leftover pizza his mom had promised to save for him in the fridge. Tommy adjusted the straps on his worn-out backpack and kicked a pebble down the sidewalk. It was one of those typical Tuesday afternoons where nothing exciting ever happened in their quiet neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes in circles, elderly folks sat on their porches fanning themselves, and the ice cream truck's jingle echoed somewhere in the distance. Everything felt perfectly ordinary and predictable. But as Tommy turned the corner onto Maple Street, something caught his attention. About halfway down the block, a silver car sat completely still in the middle of the road. Its hazard lights blinked on and off in an urgent rhythm, like a distress signal nobody was answering. Cars drove around it, some honking impatiently, others barely slowing down before swerving into the opposite lane. Tommy slowed his pace, squinting against the bright sunlight to get a better look. Standing next to the driver's side door was an elderly woman. She looked to be in her 70s, wearing a floral print dress and sensible shoes. Her gray hair was neatly styled, but her face showed pure panic. She kept waving at the passing cars, her movements becoming more desperate with each vehicle that ignored her. The boy watched as a shiny SUV drove past the woman without even tapping the brakes. Then a pickup truck did the same. Then another car, and another. It was like she was invisible. Tommy could see her shoulders sag a little more with each car that passed. She pulled out her cell phone, stared at it for a moment, then put it back in her purse. Maybe she didn't know who to call. Maybe she didn't have anyone to call. Tommy stood there for a few seconds, his tired legs reminding him that he'd already pushed himself hard enough today. He thought about that pizza waiting at home. He thought about the math homework he still needed to finish. He thought about how his mom always said he shouldn't talk to strangers. But then he looked at the woman again, and something in his chest tightened. His mom had also taught him something else. She'd told him countless times that when you see someone who needs help, you don't just walk away. You don't make excuses. You do what you can, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when nobody else is doing it. Tommy took a deep breath and jogged over to the stalled vehicle. As he got closer, he could see the worry lines etched deeply into the woman's face. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her eyes looked wet like she might start crying at any moment. "Excuse me, ma'am," Tommy called out as he approached. "Do you need some help?" The woman turned to look at him, and relief flooded her features instantly. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, dear, I desperately need help. My car just died right here in the middle of the road. I tried to restart it, but nothing's working. I've been standing here for almost 20 minutes and nobody will stop." Tommy could hear the frustration and fear in her voice. He glanced around at the traffic still flowing around them. The situation was actually pretty dangerous. If someone wasn't paying attention, they could easily crash into the stalled car. "Okay, don't worry," Tommy said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We need to get your car out of the road before someone hits it. Do you think if I push from the back, you could steer it over to that parking lot?" He pointed to a small lot next to a convenience store about 30 feet away. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, nodded quickly. Yes, I can do that. But are you sure you can push it by yourself? It's awfully heavy." Tommy wasn't sure at all. He'd never pushed a car before, but he'd just spent 2 hours doing squats and running drills, so his legs were already warmed up. How hard could it be? "I'll give it my best shot," he said with a small smile. He dropped his heavy backpack on the sidewalk, where it landed with a thud. Mrs. Patterson hurried back to the driver's seat while Tommy positioned himself at the rear of the sedan. He placed both palms flat against the trunk and tested the weight with a small push. The car didn't budge. He planted his feet more firmly, bent his knees the way Coach Williams had taught him for maximum power, and pushed harder. Slowly, incredibly slowly, the car began to move. Tommy's face scrunched up with effort, his muscles burning as he threw all his weight into the task. His sneakers scraped against the hot pavement as he drove forward with his legs, pushing one step at a time. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. Mrs. Patterson did her part perfectly, keeping the steering wheel steady and guiding the car toward the parking lot. Other drivers continued to pass by, some finally slowing down to give them space, though nobody offered to help. A few people stared out their windows as they drove past, but that was it. Tommy's arms trembled and his legs screamed in protest, but he kept pushing. 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet. The parking lot entrance was getting closer. His breath came in short gasps, and he wondered if he'd actually be able to finish. The car felt like it weighed 1,000,000 pounds. "You're doing great, sweetheart, just a little bit more," Mrs. Patterson called out encouragingly from inside the car. Those words gave Tommy a second wind. He gritted his teeth, found some reserve of strength he didn't know he had, and pushed even harder. Finally, mercifully, the front wheels of the car rolled into the parking lot. Mrs. Patterson turned the wheel and the car coasted to a stop in an empty space. Tommy leaned against the back of the car, breathing heavily, his entire body shaking from the exertion. His basketball practice suddenly seemed easy compared to what he'd just done. But as he caught his breath and wiped the sweat from his face with his shirt, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They'd done it. The car was safe. Mrs. Patterson was safe, and other drivers were no longer at risk of an accident. Mrs. Patterson got out of the car and hurried over to him, her face transformed by gratitude. "Young man, you are an absolute angel," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I cannot thank you enough. You have no idea how scared I was out there. All those cars just kept driving past like I didn't exist." "It's okay, ma'am," Tommy said between breaths, still trying to recover. "I'm just glad I could help." Mrs. Patterson reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. "Please, let me give you something for your trouble. You work so hard and in this heat." Tommy shook his head immediately, holding up his hands. No, that's okay. I don't need anything. My mom always says we should help people when we can. It's just the right thing to do." What neither of them noticed was the dark blue sedan parked on the opposite side of the street, about half a block away. Inside, a man sat watching the entire scene unfold, his phone held up to the window, recording everything. The man sitting in the dark blue sedan lowered his phone slowly, his eyes still fixed on the scene across the street. His name was Robert Mitchell, and he'd been a news reporter for the local station for almost 15 years. In that time, he'd covered everything from city council meetings to natural disasters, from crime scenes to feel-good stories about rescued puppies. But something about what he'd just witnessed hit differently. Robert had initially pulled over to make a phone call to his editor about a story he was chasing. He'd noticed the stalled car in his rearview mirror and watched as vehicle after vehicle simply drove around it. He'd counted at least 20 cars that passed without stopping. 20 people who saw someone in distress and chose to keep going with their day. It made him feel a familiar heaviness in his chest, the kind that came from seeing too much of humanity's indifference. Then this kid had shown up. Robert had watched the whole thing unfold. The way the boy had jogged over without hesitation. The way he'd dropped his backpack and gotten right to work. The determined look on his face as he pushed that car with everything he had. And most importantly, the way he'd refused money and simply said it was the right thing to do before walking away. Robert looked down at his phone and replayed the video he'd just recorded. The footage was clear, the moment was powerful, and the message was exactly what people needed to see right now. In a world that seemed to be growing colder and more disconnected by the day, here was a tired teenager who stopped to help a stranger when dozens of adults couldn't be bothered. He sat in his car for a few more minutes watching as the boy helped Mrs. Patterson call a tow truck. The kid waited with her, making sure she wasn't alone, even though Robert could tell the boy was exhausted. Only after the tow truck arrived did the teenager grab his backpack and continue on his way home. Never once looking back or making a big deal about what he'd done, Robert started his car and drove back to the newsroom, his mind racing with possibilities. This was the kind of story that could remind people about basic human kindness. This was the kind of moment that could inspire others to do better, to be better. By the time he pulled into the station's parking lot, he'd already made his decision. Back at his desk, Robert transferred the video from his phone to his computer and watched it 3 more times. Each viewing convinced him more that this needed to be shared. He opened up the station's social media accounts and began crafting a post. He needed to get the words just right. After several attempts, he typed out his final version. In a world where people walk past those in need, this young man reminds us what true kindness looks like. Help us find this everyday hero. He attached the video, took a deep breath, and hit the post button. It was 6:30 in the evening. Robert went home that night not knowing if anyone would even see the post. Sometimes these things took off, and sometimes they disappeared into the endless scroll of social media without making a ripple. He ate dinner with his wife, told her about what he'd witnessed, and went to bed hoping the video would at least reach a few people who needed to see it. When Robert woke up the next morning and checked his phone, his eyes went wide. The video had been shared 200 times overnight. By the time he got to the office an hour later, it had been shared 1,000 times. By lunch, 10,000. The numbers kept climbing in a way Robert had never seen before in his entire career. People weren't just sharing the video either. The comment section was flooded with reactions. Some people were praising the boy. Others were expressing shame that so many adults had driven past without helping. Many were sharing their own stories of times they'd helped someone or times they wished they had. The post had struck a nerve, tapping into something deep in people's hearts. Other news outlets started picking up the story. A station from the next city over called asking for permission to use the footage. Then another called. Then a regional network. By the end of the day, the video had spread far beyond their local area. National news websites were embedding it in articles. It was being shared across different platforms, reaching millions of people, but nobody knew who the boy was. That detail made the story even more compelling. He wasn't doing it for attention or recognition. He'd simply helped someone and walked away, probably never expecting anyone to notice or care. The mystery of his identity became part of the story's appeal, and people started trying to figure out who he was. Meanwhile, Tommy had no idea any of this was happening. He'd gone home that Tuesday evening, eaten his pizza, finished his homework, and gone to bed like it was any other night. He hadn't mentioned helping Mrs. Patterson to anyone. It wasn't that he was trying to keep it secret. It just didn't seem worth mentioning. He'd pushed a car, big deal. People helped each other all the time, didn't they? The next morning, Tommy went to school just like always. He sat through his classes, ate lunch with his friends, and headed to basketball practice after the final bell. He had no clue that his face was being seen by millions of people online, or that local residents were working together to figure out who he was. But someone else had figured it out. Tommy's mother, Linda Chen, worked as a receptionist at a medical office downtown. During her lunch break on Wednesday, one of her co-workers rushed over to her desk with her phone held out. "Linda, you have to see this video. It's everywhere right now. This kid helped an old lady and it's just the sweetest thing." Linda took the phone and pressed play. Within 3 seconds, she recognized the backpack. 5 seconds in, she recognized the way her son pushed his hair back when he was concentrating hard on something. By the time the video ended, tears were streaming down her face. That was her Tommy, her sweet, kind boy who she'd raised to always think of others, even when life was hard. Linda's hands shook as she pulled out her own phone and called Tommy. He answered on the third ring, sounding confused about why his mom was calling him during school hours. "Tommy, honey, did you help an elderly woman with her car yesterday?" There was a pause. "Oh, yeah. Her car broke down on Maple Street. How did you know about that?" Linda laughed through her tears. "Baby, you're on the internet. Millions of people have seen you helping that woman. You're famous." Tommy's response was exactly what Linda expected. "Wait, what? Mom, what are you talking about? I just pushed a car." Over the next hour, Linda sent Tommy the link to the video and explained everything that was happening. Tommy sat in the school library, staring at his phone in complete disbelief as he read through hundreds of comments from strangers. People were calling him a hero, an inspiration, a role model. He felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment. He hadn't done anything heroic. He'd just helped someone who needed help. By late Wednesday afternoon, Robert Mitchell had confirmed Tommy's identity. Mrs. Patterson, when contacted by the news station, remembered that Tommy had mentioned which school he attended while they waited for the tow truck. The school district helped connect Robert with Tommy's family, and the reporter called Linda to ask if they'd be willing to do a proper interview. Linda was hesitant at first. She knew her son hated being the center of attention. Tommy was the kind of kid who blushed when teachers praised him in class. But when she talked to him about it that evening, Tommy surprised her. "If doing the interview makes more people want to help each other, then I guess it's worth it," he said quietly. They scheduled the interview for Friday evening. Robert assured them it would be casual and comfortable, just a conversation about what happened and why Tommy had stopped to help. As Friday approached, the video continued to spread, and anticipation built about finally hearing from the mysterious Good Samaritan who'd captured hearts across the country. Tommy spent those days trying to process everything while also dealing with sudden attention at school. His classmates had recognized him in the video and everyone wanted to talk about it. Some kids thought it was cool. Others teased him for being a Boy Scout. But most people seemed genuinely impressed, and even the teachers started looking at him differently. On Friday evening, Robert arrived at their modest apartment with a cameraman. Tommy sat on their worn couch, fidgeting nervously with his hands. The bright lights made everything feel surreal and overwhelming, but when the interview started, Robert's warm and encouraging manner helped Tommy relax. They talked about what happened, why he'd stopped, and what he'd been thinking as he pushed that car. And in that interview, Tommy would say something that would make the story explode even bigger than before. The interview aired on Friday evening during the 6 o'clock news broadcast. Families across the region sat down to watch, having heard all week about the mysterious boy who'd helped a stranger. Robert had edited the footage carefully, showing clips of Tommy pushing the car alongside their conversation. What unfolded on screen was even more powerful than anyone expected. Tommy sat on the couch looking slightly uncomfortable in a clean button-up shirt his mother had ironed for the occasion. His hair was neatly combed, but he kept running his fingers through it nervously. When Robert asked him why he'd stopped to help, Tommy's answer was simple and honest. "I don't know. I just saw her standing there and nobody was stopping. She looked really scared. My mom raised me and my little sister by herself, and she always tells us that we're supposed to look out for people. She says that's what makes a community strong, you know, when people actually care about each other." Tommy shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Robert nodded, and then asked the question that would change everything. "Tell me a little bit about your family, Tommy. What's life like for you at home?" Tommy hesitated for a moment, glancing at his mother who sat just off camera. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Well, it's just me, my mom, and my sister Katie. She's 10. My mom works really hard. She has 2 jobs actually, one at a medical office during the day and another one cleaning offices at night a few times a week." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Things have been kind of tight lately. My mom's daytime job cut her hours a few months ago, so money's been pretty tough. But she never complains about it. She just keeps working and makes sure me and Katie have what we need." There was a deep admiration in Tommy's voice when he talked about his mother. Robert leaned forward slightly. "That must be difficult for all of you. What do you do to help out?" "I do odd jobs around the neighborhood when I can," Tommy explained. "I mow lawns in the summer, shovel snow in the winter, help people carry groceries, stuff like that. I've been saving up because Katie needs new shoes for school. Her current ones have holes in the bottom and she puts cardboard in them so her socks don't get wet when it rains." The camera briefly cut to Linda, whose eyes were glistening with tears. She'd tried so hard to shield her children from their financial struggles. But Tommy had noticed everything. He'd always been observant like that, always aware of others and their needs. "So even though your own family is going through a hard time," Robert said gently, "you still stop to help someone else without thinking twice about it?" Tommy looked confused by the question, like Robert was missing something obvious. "Yeah, but that's exactly why you help people. When things are hard, you know how it feels. You know what it's like to need help. So when you see someone else struggling, you help them. That's just what you're supposed to do." Those words hung in the air for a moment. The simplicity and purity of that logic, coming from a 14-year-old kid who had every reason to focus only on his own problems, struck a chord with everyone watching. Tommy wasn't trying to be profound or inspirational. He was just explaining how he saw the world. The interview continued for a few more minutes. Tommy talked about school, about basketball, about his dreams of maybe going to college someday if they could figure out how to afford it. He mentioned that he'd like to be a teacher because his English teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, had been really encouraging and made him believe he could do more with his life than he'd thought possible. When Robert asked if there was anything Tommy wanted to say to the people watching, the boy thought for a moment, I guess I'd just say that helping people doesn't have to be some big thing. It can be small stuff. Hold a door open, carry someone's groceries, check on your elderly neighbors. If we all just did little things for each other, I think the world would be a lot better. The interview ended with Tommy looking directly into the camera with those earnest eyes, and viewers could see exactly what kind of person he was. Not someone looking for glory or recognition, just a good kid trying to do right by the people around him, even when life had dealt him a challenging hand. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour of the broadcast, the news station's phone lines were jammed with calls. People wanted to know how they could help Tommy's family. The station's website crashed from too much traffic. Social media exploded with reactions to the interview. People weren't just moved by Tommy's actions anymore. They were moved by his character, his humility, and his perspective on life. Here was a boy who had legitimate struggles of his own, yet he'd internalized the lesson that hardship should make you more compassionate, not less. That when you know what it feels like to need help, you become more willing to offer it to others. A businessman named George Hamilton watched the interview from his home office. He'd built a successful chain of hardware stores across the state and had been thinking lately about ways to give back to his community. Tommy's story hit him hard. He'd grown up poor himself, raised by a single mother who'd worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. He saw his younger self in Tommy. George immediately opened his laptop and created a fundraising page. He titled it, "Help Tommy's Family," and wrote a heartfelt description of why this boy and his family deserved support. He seeded the fund with a personal donation of $5,000 and shared the link across his business networks and social media accounts. The page went live at 7:30 that evening. By 8 o'clock, it had raised $12,000. By 9 o'clock, $25,000. People from all over the country were contributing. Some donated $5, others donated hundreds. They all left comments explaining why they were giving. "This boy restored my faith in humanity," one comment read. "His family deserves help from all of us," wrote another. "Teaching my kids about Tommy tonight," someone else posted. This is what a real role model looks like. But the donations were just the beginning. Tommy's high school principal, Mrs. Alvarez, called Linda that same evening. The school board had held an emergency meeting after watching the interview. They wanted to offer Tommy a full scholarship for his remaining high school years, covering all fees, books, and even uniforms for sports teams. They'd also arranged for Katie to receive a similar scholarship when she reached high school age. Linda sat at their small kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Are you serious?" she kept asking. "Are you really serious?" Mrs. Alvarez assured her it was completely real. The school was proud to have Tommy as a student and wanted to invest in his future. Several teachers had already volunteered to provide free tutoring if Tommy wanted extra help with college prep courses. Tommy didn't fully understand what was happening. He'd just told the truth in an interview. He'd just explained how his mom had raised him and why he thought helping people mattered. Now strangers were donating money and his school was offering scholarships. It felt surreal and overwhelming, but more surprises were coming. Over the next 2 days, local businesses started reaching out. A grocery store offered Linda a better-paying position as an assistant manager with consistent daytime hours. An accounting firm offered her an entry-level position with training, recognizing that she was intelligent and hardworking despite not having a college degree. 3 different restaurants offered Tommy part-time jobs that would work around his school and basketball schedule. The fundraising page that George Hamilton had created passed $50,000 by Sunday evening. People were still donating, still sharing the story, still inspired by the message Tommy had shared. News outlets from across the country were now covering the story, and Tommy's interview had been viewed over 8 million times online. Tommy's mother sat him and Katie down on Sunday night to talk about everything that was happening. The 3 of them held hands around their small dining table, and Linda cried again as she explained how their lives were about to change because Tommy had chosen to help a stranger. "This is all because you have a good heart," Linda told her son, squeezing his hand. "Because you listened when I taught you to care about other people. I'm so proud of you, baby, so incredibly proud." Katie, who'd been quiet through most of the craziness, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean I'm getting new shoes?" Tommy laughed and pulled his little sister into a hug. "Yeah, Katie. You're getting new shoes. Really good ones. But nobody in the family had any idea what was about to happen next. The biggest surprise of all was still to come, and it would arrive on their doorstep in just 1 week. The week following the interview felt like a dream that Tommy kept expecting to wake up from. Every morning, he'd open his eyes in his small bedroom and take a moment to remember that yes, this was all really happening. His life had genuinely changed because he'd pushed a car. School became strange in ways Tommy hadn't anticipated. Kids who'd never talked to him before suddenly wanted to sit with him at lunch. Teachers smiled at him in the hallways. Even the principal stopped him twice just to tell him how proud the school was. Tommy appreciated the kindness, but part of him missed being invisible. Just another kid in the crowd. The basketball team had a game on Thursday night, and Tommy was shocked when he walked into the gym to find it packed. Usually, maybe 50 people showed up to their games. Tonight, there had to be 300 people in the stands. They weren't just there for basketball. They were there to see him, the boy from the video. When the announcer called his name during starting lineups, the crowd erupted in applause that lasted almost a minute. Tommy's face turned bright red as he jogged to center court. His teammate, a kid named Jake who'd been his friend since elementary school, elbowed him gently. "Dude, you're like a celebrity now. This is wild." "I just want to play basketball," Tommy muttered, but he couldn't help smiling a little. The attention was embarrassing, but the support felt good. It felt like the whole community had wrapped its arms around his family, and that warmth was hard to ignore. Meanwhile, Linda had accepted the position at the accounting firm. They were willing to train her and work around her schedule so she could still be present for her kids. The pay was nearly double what she'd been making, and it came with health insurance. Real health insurance, the kind where you could actually go to the doctor without worrying about the bill. She'd cried in the parking lot after accepting the job, sitting in her old car with her hands on the steering wheel, hardly believing this was her life now. Katie got her new shoes on Tuesday afternoon. Linda took her to a real shoe store, not a thrift shop or a discount outlet, but an actual store where they measured your feet and helped you find the right fit. Katie tried on 4 different pairs before settling on purple sneakers with silver laces. She wore them out of the store and didn't take them off for 3 days straight, even sleeping in them the first night until Linda insisted they needed to come off. "Mom, do you think Tommy's going to be famous forever?" Katie asked one evening while they ate dinner together. It was one of the first meals in months where Linda hadn't looked stressed about money, hadn't been calculating in her head whether they could afford to eat this same meal again next week. "I don't think so, sweetheart," Linda answered honestly. People have short memories. Another story will come along and everyone will move on to that. But what matters is that Tommy did something good and good things came from it. That's what we'll remember. Tommy nodded, pushing rice around his plate. "I hope people do move on soon. It's kind of a lot." But before people could move on, one more thing was about to happen, something that nobody saw coming. Saturday morning arrived cool and cloudy, the kind of late autumn day where you could see your breath in the air. Tommy woke up later than usual, grateful for the weekend after an exhausting week. He shuffled into the kitchen in his pajama pants and an old t-shirt, yawning and heading straight for the cereal cabinet. "Tommy," his mother called from the living room. Her voice sounded strange, kind of choked up. "Tommy, come here. You need to see this." He walked into the living room and found his mother standing by the window, one hand pressed against the glass. Katie stood beside her on her tiptoes trying to see better. "What's going on?" Tommy asked. Linda stepped aside so Tommy could look out the window. Their apartment was on the 2nd floor, and their window faced the narrow alley behind the building. It wasn't much to look at normally. Just a concrete space where residents parked their cars and kids sometimes played basketball against a rusty hoop someone had mounted years ago. But this morning, the alley was full of people. Not just a few people, dozens of people, maybe 100 or more, and they were still arriving. Tommy pressed his face closer to the glass, trying to understand what he was seeing. There were families with children, elderly couples, teenagers, people of all ages standing in the alley, and many of them were carrying things. Boxes, bags, furniture. A man was unloading a brand new couch from a truck. A group of women were setting up tables with food. Someone was holding a huge sign that read, "Thank you, Tommy," in bright red letters. "What is this?" Tommy whispered. "Mom, what's happening?" Linda's eyes were already wet with tears. "I don't know, baby. Someone slipped a note under our door this morning. Here." She handed him a piece of paper. Tommy unfolded it and read aloud. Dear Chen family, your story touched our hearts and reminded us what community means. We want to give back to you the way Tommy gave to Mrs. Patterson. Please come outside at 9 o'clock. Your neighbors and friends. Tommy looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:45. He looked back out the window at the growing crowd in the alley. His heart started pounding in his chest. This is for us? All of this? Linda nodded, unable to speak. She pulled both her children into a tight hug, and the three of them stood there by the window, watching more people arrive with more donations, more supplies, more kindness than they knew what to do with. At exactly 9 o'clock, someone knocked on their apartment door. Linda wiped her eyes, smoothed down her hair, and opened it to find Mrs. Patterson standing there with a warm smile. The elderly woman Tommy had helped was holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. Hello, dear, Mrs. Patterson said softly. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of organizing a little gathering. After what your boy did for me and after hearing your story, well, my whole family wanted to help. And when we mentioned it to the neighbors, and then to some folks from church, everyone wanted to be involved. We hope this is okay. Linda started crying again, but she was smiling through the tears. Okay, Mrs. Patterson, this is more than okay. This is incredible. Mrs. Patterson reached out and squeezed Linda's hand. Your son has a beautiful heart because you gave it to him. This is our way of saying thank you, and of showing Tommy that kindness creates more kindness. The four of them walked downstairs and stepped out into the alley. The moment Tommy appeared, the entire crowd burst into applause. He froze, completely overwhelmed by the scene in front of him. These weren't strangers. These were his neighbors, people from the community center, families from his school, members of local churches, the owner of the corner store where his mom bought groceries. An older man stepped forward. Tommy recognized him as Mr. Johnson, who owned a construction company in town. Tommy, we heard your apartment could use some work. I've got my crew here ready to renovate the place, completely free of charge. New paint, fixed plumbing, proper heating, the works. We're going to make sure your family has a comfortable home. A woman Tommy didn't recognize spoke up next. We've collected donations of furniture, clothes, school supplies, and groceries. Everything here is for your family. We've also set up a college fund for both you and your sister. Tommy's eyes went wide. A college fund? For me and Katie? Absolutely, another man said. He was wearing a suit and looked important. Several local businesses have contributed. It's enough to cover tuition, books, and living expenses for both of you when the time comes. The donations kept coming. A local gym owner had brought a brand new basketball hoop to install in the alley so Tommy could practice at home. The owner of a bookstore had brought boxes of books for both kids. Someone had brought a complete set of winter coats, hats, and gloves for the family. The tables were covered with homemade food that different families had prepared, but it wasn't just about the physical items. Person after person came up to Tommy and his family to share their own stories. A woman told them how Tommy's actions had inspired her to volunteer at a homeless shelter. A teenage boy said he'd started helping elderly neighbors with yard work after seeing the video. A father explained that he'd used Tommy's interview to teach his kids about compassion and community. Katie clung to her mother's side, her eyes huge as she took in the scene. She'd never seen anything like this. Neither had Tommy. Neither had Linda. The sheer generosity and warmth radiating from this crowd of people was almost too much to process. Robert Mitchell was there too, camera in hand, documenting everything. But this time he wasn't just reporting a story. He was part of it. He'd contributed to the college fund and had helped Mrs. Patterson spread the word about the gathering. Tommy stood in the middle of the alley, surrounded by people who'd come together because of one simple act of kindness, and he finally understood something important. His mother had always taught him to help others, but he'd never fully grasped how powerful that could be. Not just for the person being helped, but for everyone involved. Kindness was contagious. It spread like ripples in water, touching lives in ways you could never predict. An elderly man approached Tommy with tears in his eyes. Son, 40 years ago, someone helped me when I was down on my luck. I never got to thank them properly. Let me help you now, and maybe someday you'll help someone else. That's how it works. That's how we take care of each other. Tommy nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He finally managed to say, thank you. All of you. Thank you so much. The gathering in the alley lasted for hours. What started as a simple donation event turned into something much bigger. Families stayed to talk and connect with each other. Kids played together while adults shared stories and food. The narrow alley behind Tommy's apartment building had transformed into the heart of the community, pulsing with life and laughter and genuine human connection. Tommy moved through the crowd in a daze, shaking hands and accepting hugs from people who felt like old friends even though he'd never met them before. Everyone wanted to tell him something, to share how his story had affected them. It was humbling and overwhelming and beautiful all at once. One moment stuck with him especially. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair approached him carrying a small wooden box. She introduced herself as Mrs. Rodriguez, the grandmother of his English teacher. "My grandson talks about you all the time," she said with a warm smile. "He says you're one of his brightest students, always asking thoughtful questions." Tommy felt his cheeks flush. "Mr. Rodriguez is a really good teacher. He makes me want to learn." Mrs. Rodriguez handed him the wooden box. "This belonged to my late husband. He was a teacher too for 40 years. Inside are some of his favorite books, the ones he read over and over. I want you to have them. He always said that education was the key to changing your life. And I think you understand that." Tommy opened the box carefully and saw several worn paperbacks inside. Their spines creased from countless readings. "Are you sure? These seem really special." "I'm certain," she said firmly. "My husband would have loved you. He believed in helping young people reach their potential. Consider this an investment in your future." Tommy thanked her and carefully set the box aside with the other donations. Each gift came with a story, a connection, a piece of someone's heart. This wasn't just about giving things to a family in need. This was about building something bigger, something that would last beyond today. As the afternoon wore on, Mr. Johnson and his construction crew got to work on the apartment. They moved furniture out, assessed what needed to be fixed, and made plans for the renovation. Linda walked through with them, still in shock that this was happening. They were going to fix the leaky faucet that had dripped for 2 years, replace the broken heating unit that barely worked, patch the cracks in the walls, paint everything fresh and clean. "This will take us about 2 weeks," Mr. Johnson explained. "We'll work around your schedule so you're not too disrupted, and we're going to make sure this place is safe and comfortable for your family." Linda pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back more tears. "I don't know how to thank you. I've been trying to save up to fix things, but there was always something else that needed the money more." Mr. Johnson patted her shoulder gently. "You don't need to thank me. You raised a good son who stopped to help someone when nobody else would. That says everything about the kind of person you are. This is our way of supporting that." While the adults talked logistics, Katie was having the time of her life. She'd made friends with several kids her age, and they were taking turns trying to shoot baskets at the new hoop that had been installed. Her purple shoes flashed as she ran around, her laughter ringing out across the alley. Tommy watched his little sister and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, Katie looked like a normal kid without worries, just playing and being happy. As evening approached and people started to pack up and head home, Mrs. Patterson gathered everyone together for one final announcement. She climbed onto a small stepladder someone provided so everyone could see her, and the crowd quieted down. "Before we all go," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying across the alley, "I want to say something. What happened here today was sparked by one young man's decision to help a stranger, but it's turned into something much more meaningful. We've remembered what it means to be a community. We've remembered that we're all connected, that we all have something to offer, and that kindness multiplies when we share it." She paused, looking around at all the faces gathered there. "I propose that we make this an annual tradition, one day a year where our community comes together to help someone in need. We'll call it Community Kindness Day, and we'll hold it every year on this date to remember what Tommy taught us." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. People were already discussing who they might help next year, what projects they could take on, how they could make this bigger and better. What had started as a response to Tommy's story was becoming something that would outlive the news cycle and the viral video. It was becoming a real tradition, a commitment to ongoing compassion. Robert Mitchell stepped forward with his camera to interview Tommy one last time. "Tommy, how does it feel to see all of this? To know that your simple act of kindness created this entire movement?" Tommy thought carefully before answering. He'd learned over the past week that his words mattered, that people were really listening to what he had to say. "Honestly, I still can't believe I just pushed a car and all this happened. But I think what I've learned is that we're all more connected than we realize. When you help someone, it doesn't just affect that one person. It affects everyone around them and everyone around you. It spreads out like circles in water. He looked around at his neighbors, his family, all these people who'd given up their Saturday to be here. I used to think that my family's problems were ours alone to deal with. I thought asking for help was weakness, or that we had to struggle by ourselves because that's just how life worked. But this showed me that community means we don't have to face hard times alone. When we help each other, we all become stronger. Tommy's voice grew more confident as he continued. I hope people watching this don't think you have to do something big to make a difference. You don't need money or power or fame. You just need to notice when someone needs help and choose to do something about it. Hold a door, carry groceries, check on your neighbors, smile at a stranger. All those little things add up to something huge. Robert lowered his camera and smiled. That's beautiful. Tommy, thank you. As darkness fell and the last families headed home, Tommy, Katie, and Linda stood in their alley surrounded by boxes and furniture and more blessings than they could count. The new basketball hoop gleamed under the streetlight. The smell of home-cooked meals lingered in the air. And everywhere they looked were reminders that they weren't alone, that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Linda pulled her children close, one arm around each of them. Do you two understand what happened today? She asked softly. Katie nodded enthusiastically. Lots of people love us. Tommy smiled at his sister's simple wisdom. Yeah. And they showed us that being kind to others means they'll be kind back. It's like a circle that keeps going. Exactly, Linda said, kissing the top of his head. And you started that circle, baby. You chose kindness when you didn't have to, and look what it created. Over the following months, the story of Tommy and the stalled car would fade from national headlines. News stories would capture people's attention, and life would move forward as it always does. But in that neighborhood, in that community, something fundamental had shifted. The annual Community Kindness Day became a real tradition. Every year on that same date, residents would gather to help a family or individual in need. They'd pool resources, donate time, and remind each other that compassion was a choice they could make every single day. Tommy went on to excel in school with the support of his teachers and the community. The college fund grew, and when the time came, he did go to college. He studied education, inspired by Mr. Rodriguez and the wooden box of books from Mrs. Rodriguez. He wanted to be the kind of teacher who saw potential in kids who didn't see it in themselves. Katie flourished too, never having to worry about holes in her shoes again. She grew up watching her brother's example and became known in her own right as someone who always helped others, who always chose kindness. Linda built a career at the accounting firm and eventually became a manager. She never forgot what it felt like to struggle, so she always made sure to give back to others facing hard times. She volunteered at food banks, mentored other single mothers, and made sure her children understood that their blessings came with responsibility. Mrs. Patterson became a regular visitor to the Chen family, almost like an adopted grandmother to the kids. She'd tell anyone who would listen about the day her car broke down and how a young boy's kindness had changed not just her life, but an entire community. Years later, when people asked Tommy about that day he pushed the stalled car, he'd always say the same thing. I didn't do anything special. I just helped someone who needed help. What was special was how everyone else responded. They reminded me that we're all in this together, and that the world gets better when we choose to see each other, really see each other, and act with compassion. And in that neighborhood, in that community, people did see each other. They did act with compassion. They did help when help was needed, because a 14-year-old boy had shown them that kindness wasn't complicated or difficult or reserved for special occasions. It was simple, it was human, and it was always the right choice. The alley behind the apartment building where Tommy grew up became something of a local landmark. The basketball hoop he'd received that day remained there for years, where kids would play and parents would tell the story of Community Kindness Day and how it all began. It stood as a reminder that one person's choice to help can ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict, touching lives and transforming communities in beautiful, unexpected ways. Tommy's story proved something important, that we don't need to be rich or famous or powerful to change the world. We just need to be willing to push a car when we see someone stranded, to offer help when help is needed, to choose kindness even when we're tired, even when we have our own struggles, even when nobody's watching. Because someone's always watching, and more importantly, someone always feels it when kindness comes their way.